Hello and welcome to Video Game Hangover. I'm Randy Dickinson and I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Hello, I'm DJ Ross. I'm in Mountain View, California.
Each week on Video Game Hangover, we talk about the games that have been keeping us up at night. On this week's show, we're playing Disney's Tron Identity and Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask 3D.
Oh, finally a Zelda show.
People are hungry for the Zelda content.
Yeah. Well, we got it this week.
Mm-hmm.
I never really played Majora's Mask. I rented it once and didn't get too far into it, so I'm looking forward to hearing what it's about.
Oh, interesting. There's a story. There's a circuitous route by which I arrived at Majora's Mask as my game for this week. So, I was listening to another podcast and they were doing like a pre-Zelda hypeathon as well. Maybe not as well. Is that what we're doing? Is that what this is?
I was just going to ask, is that what's happening?
Yeah.
This is part of the Hypotron?
Hold on to your hats.
I feel like I'm already burned out on hearing about Tears of the Kingdom. Just like, go away. It's not even out yet. Leave me alone.
Yeah. My entire YouTube feed is like, here's this thing. Here's this other 56 things we learned at the new. I'm like, that's enough, guys. That's
yeah.
We're all going to play it on Friday probably, and we'll arrive there together. It'll be fine.
Yeah. All the forums I read are like, here's the review thread, here's the spoiler thread, here's another spoiler thread, because the other spoiler thread is already full, despite the game not being out yet. Here's the thread for everybody who got the leaked version early, so they're all having a fun time in there, I can only assume.
I'm not even engaging with that. Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah, like, how many of these do we need? Just put it all in a Zelda box somewhere, and I will look at it again in 6 months.
On a related note, we have a Zelda channel on our Discord if you want to come hang out with us Friday when the game comes out and gently discuss your love of the new Zelda game with some like-minded folks.
Oh, yeah. I already muted that thing. So I was like, well, it's just going to be Zelda stuff from here on out, I guess. So again,
DJ will not be there. I will be. Yeah. Right now, we're really just kind of posting like hype memes. But yeah, Friday we're gonna talk about a little bit of Zelda. No spoilers. Maybe if somebody gets stuck with a thing or it has a particularly fun screenshot, we're gonna share those kinds of things. But yeah. So if you don't want to do the whole crazy 463 things we learned in the first hour of the new Zelda game,
5,000 things you need to know before playing Tears of the Kingdom,
then join our Discord. Come hang out with us and chat about Zelda and an assortment of other fun things.
Yeah. And if you need me, I'll be in the Final Fantasy channel next door.
There you go. I've also heard that there's a beta for like the final beta for Diablo 4 coming out this Friday as well, which seems like a weird choice for that to happen. But yeah, if you want to talk about Diablo 4, come on down.
Sure. I mean, that's just an ongoing thing. I mean, I'm sure they have their own beta calendar planned out. I just learned that like Telltale style Star Trek game is coming out in 2 weeks.
Oh.
Which is the same day that there's a big Final Fantasy patch. So sorry, Star Trek, you're going to be on the back burner for a bit. But it's just, what a chaotic month.
Yeah. I don't have a ton of games on my release list for this year, but like I made a brief list at the beginning of the year of things I'm kind of, mildly interested in. And Rocksteady is making a Suicide Squad game. And I'm like, I would play a Rocksteady Suicide Squad game. It comes out a week after Legend of Zelda. I'm like, well, that's really dumb, you guys.
That's just retail suicide.
I will not have completed my 200-hour playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom by that point, and I'm not going to get to your game.
Yeah. Does it mean you're canceling your pre-order on Street Fighter 6?
Is that coming out in this month as well?
Oh, yeah, that's like 3 weeks from now. And then a month or so from now is Final Fantasy 16. So, going to be a busy summer.
Yeah, neither of those are on my calendar, honestly. But
well, it's because it's still May. I'm sure when you tear off the calendar, they'll be like, oh, there they are.
Oh, what happened? Yep. So, the circuitous route by which I arrived at Majora's Mask is I had started playing this game a long time ago when it first came out for the 3DS.
On the N64? Oh, no.
No. Not quite that long time ago. They did a 3D remake of Majora's Mask. I think in 2015, I had a save file in the game that I had played it at some point in 2015.
Oh.
So I think that was probably the year that this came out for the 3DS, and kind of bounced off of it. And then last week, didn't finish it. Didn't play a whole hell of a lot of it either. Just thought maybe, okay, this is the rare Zelda game that is not quite for me. It's a little different from...
Oh, because there's only one of those.
So far, I've not found a lot of Zelda games that I find disagreeable.
Okay.
Twilight Princess and Majora's Mask.
I remember someone having a difficult time getting into the original Legend of Zelda.
Oh, yeah.
Sometime last summer.
This is true. Yeah. Okay, maybe it's a slightly longer list. But
Okay.
I had blacked out that. That's true. Yeah, that was rough. That's some tough going.
It's not for everybody these days.
Yeah. So last week on a different podcast I was listening to, they were doing what was your first Zelda game and what is your favorite Zelda game?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the hosts' favorite Zelda game was Majora's Mask. And they gushed for 15 minutes about why it was amazing and why it was so different and unique and how they had such an amazing time with it and got completely roped in. And I'm like, maybe I've slept on Majora's Mask all this time. Like,
yeah, people love it.
Yeah, I should give it another shot. And I decided at this point, sort of between the downtime ahead of Tears of the Kingdom come out, maybe I will try some Majora's Mask.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I ended up playing a lot of Majora's Mask over the weekend.
Oh, a lot of it. Okay.
Quite a bit of it. Certainly way more than I did in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, I can't believe it, but I think I overlooked this when, I was just buying up everything on the eShop before it closed a couple months ago.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's possible. It seems like a fairly notable game. My only guess is that it's on the Switch Online thing, the Nintendo 64 thing.
Yes.
So I must have just figured, I'll play it there. I'll just play the original version because that seems like something I would think.
Yeah.
But I am a little disappointed because, what if the 3D version is good?
Yeah. I have thoughts on this because before I remembered that I had bought the 3D version many years ago, I decided I was going to just play it on the Nintendo 64 virtual console that's on the Switch. But it is the Nintendo 64 version, and it's a little rough. It's
a little old.
Yeah, it definitely is not as polished as that fancy 3DS version.
Not as many polygons.
So I played about an hour of the original N64 version on the virtual console.
You did? Okay.
Yeah. And thought, geez, I can't imagine that the 3DS version of it maybe would be a little more modernized, at least a little more, what's the word? Quality of life improvements. So yeah, so I bounced immediately over to the 3D version on the 3DS, and it runs a lot smoother. It's certainly a lot prettier. The textures are not quite as ugly as the Nintendo 64 version. I noticed in that first hour, there is a concession to kind of the obtuseness of Majora's Mask, and that it is a game that really doesn't explain itself very well. And it does rely on you just sort of being in it and trying to open every door and talking to every villager and, kind of classic RPG stuff where you just walk around and do all the things and try to glue all those pieces together in some way that makes sense.
Yeah.
Early on in the 3D version, there's a Sheikah slate, like a rock with the Sheikah logo on it, in a place where that was not in the Nintendo 64 version. And I'm like, oh, here's a thing that's different. So I walked up to it and I pushed the button, and it immediately came to life and says, "You look confused. Maybe I can help." And it points you in the right direction. It says, okay, you're on the first day of Majora's Mask, and Majora's Mask is a game that happens in a 3-day cycle. You have 72 hours essentially to kind of knit together a mystery before something horrible happens to this little town. If it becomes Groundhog Day from that point forward. Something horrible happens. You start back at the beginning of the first day, and you know more than you did on the previous playthrough. And you kind of lather, rinse, repeat that until you can kind of glue the pieces back together and hopefully save this town. And the Sheikah slates are kind of all over the place in the 3DS version. So if you get stumped, it'll top up your health too. So if you're getting the snot beat out of you somewhere, you can walk up to one of the slates and activate it, and it'll give you free hints and fill up your health. So that
nice.
seems to be, other than, updating the textures and, remodeling all the characters and stuff like that. That seems to be sort of the big concession in the 3DS version, is it does sort of make an attempt to kind of point you in the right direction a little more clearly than the original Nintendo 64 version did.
How good are the hints? Like, do you need them? Or they give away too much?
Pretty good. Like, I didn't engage with it initially because I was like, okay, well, I've played the first hour already. I have a general sense of what I should be doing. I'll get a hint if I get stumped. And at some point I got stumped and I went back to it and hit it again. And it kind of presented with a checklist. It's like, on your first 3 days, you should be doing kind of focusing on these things. Make sure you talk to this guy, make sure you go to this place. And then at midnight, make sure you're here. And I was like, oh, I did one of those, and it had a little check mark next to it as I had already done it. And I talked to the other, and it had a check mark next to it. I just hadn't been in the right place at the right time. So it was cool. It was not super vague by any means. It wasn't a hint in the sense that it's sort of like, I don't know. It really kind of took some of the guesswork out of it, I guess. So it wasn't a hint so much as a point in the right direction. So I guess, if you're a player who wants something to be a little more vague and still kind of intuit some of those things yourself, the slate was not really sort of like built for that. It really was just about kind of ushering you through a walkthrough in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, that seems good. That, I think, was probably my biggest issue with, like, when I attempted to play it, is that it just felt like there's so much you would actually have to sort of learn and remember about what's going on, because the whole point is, when specific events are happening across like these 3 days in game.
Right.
And that's sort of when it turns into like an adventure game where you have to be at the right place at the right time and interact with this person while they're available to you, and et cetera, et cetera. At least that's how I assume it was going to go based on what I played. Yeah.
Yes. And you don't know unless you're kind of in the right place at the right time. So, there early on in the game, in the first half of day 2, there is a woman who walks out of a door on a side street of the village and will walk down the street to the laundry pond in the game, and then she'll sit on a bench there. But then if you wait until 6 p.m., she's gone. She walks back home. So you have that little window to interact with her to sort of like glue together her piece of the mystery. You get a hint. And then in the game, it presents you with like a flowchart, essentially, of like day 1 morning, day 1 evening, and you get little bars that show you where those people are available. There's some other icon that comes up that's a big circle that has pictures of characters' faces with lines drawn between them, like a crazy person in your house trying to solve a mystery with pieces of red string connecting all of the leads. And structurally it feels very different and way more kind of ornate of a puzzle, ornate of a social puzzle than Zelda games generally feel like. Certainly there are, dungeons and shrines and things like that in Zelda games that are themselves kind of a puzzle you're trying to suss out. But the hook of Majora's Mask is it's less about sort of dungeon crawling, at least in the first 10 hours or so that I've played, and more about kind of assembling this social puzzle of all of the people in this town with the moon crashing down on them and what they're doing with the final hours of their life, essentially. It's kind of dark. And you trying to figure out how to stop that, essentially, and talking to all the people and making these connections and making sure that you're talking to the right person at the right time as they're walking down the street, and gluing it together with some lead that you have from yesterday at this time from another character that, runs the bomb shop down the street and whispered something into your ear, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So it's complex, and I don't necessarily know if I feel like the tools in the game, that flowchart and stuff like that, help at all. It just makes
that flowchart new in the 3D version?
I don't remember that being in the Nintendo 64 version, but I may not have played it long enough for that to pop up. It uses the bottom half of the screen on the 3DS, the bottom screen, to display that. So I'm not sure if that's just something that's in a sub-menu on the Nintendo 64 one, or if that, again, is a tool in the 3D one to presumably make this process easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't really remember anything like that, but that could just be me not remembering it. It does seem like a sort of an obvious second screen feature, though, which would be cool.
But it's yeah, it still feels very obtuse. It still feels very like I'm missing something here. I find myself running around town at a certain point, and like there doesn't seem to be like anybody to talk to. I've opened all the doors. I've chatted with everybody. When I chat with people again, it's just the same line of dialogue they gave me before, and I find myself going, "What am I missing?" The cool thing in that scenario is I can run back to the Sheikah slate, and it goes, "Okay, here are the kind of the three things you could be doing right now, and if you're not doing one of them, it points you in the right direction." So I dig that that's there. I just, I wish structurally it felt a little clearer to me, like I could sort of glue some of these pieces together in my own brain without having to rely on a walkthrough or on the cheat system essentially in the game.
That's sort of what I was afraid of. Like I got the sense that like when I first played it, I thought, oh, well, this seems like something you're just going to have to live in and like learn everybody's routines in order for you to make any progress. And then you get to sort of solve puzzles on top of that. So I think that's probably why I didn't fully commit to it. I was almost expecting you to say that the Sheikah slates would let you just jump between sort of significant points in time.
There is a
do you still have to do the whole loop every time, or most of it?
there you get you get your Ocarina essentially, because the interesting thing about Majora's Mask is that it is a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time. The game starts, and you probably know this, DJ, but for the sake of our listeners, it starts with you riding your horse through the forest on the way back from having just gone through the Ocarina of Time ordeal. And you get waylaid on the road and roped into the Majora's Mask mystery. So it is a direct and immediate succession to the events of that game. So you still have your Ocarina on you, and you can play songs on it that you learn throughout the course of Majora's Mask that allow you to rewind time or to fast forward time. And the one that I like is it allows you to slow down the in-game clock.
Oh.
So
I don't even know if I got that far. That seems like it would have happened right away.
It happens early-ish, I would say, certainly in the first 3 or 4 hours.
Okay, well,
although
again,
the hook with any Zelda
game
game is
this, so
your mileage may vary. If you've not discovered that thing, maybe you don't get it until 26 hours, and who knows? But
yeah.
I got it fairly early. And yeah, an in-game week takes about 50 minutes of real life time. But you can hit the slowdown, you can play the slowdown music, and it really drags that out. I'm not sure exactly how long it makes it, if it doubles it or more, but it definitely gives you a little more breathing room, and it makes everything feel like slightly less of an emergency. Because that was my first thought of Majora's Mask, of going through those kind of first 3 days where I'm sort of like, man, it feels like everything is on fire. And every time you look up, there's this gross, sinister, horrible, misfigured moon, like getting closer and closer and closer to falling on your town.
It's a very N64 era Nintendo moon. Just the weird face.
Yeah.
Feels like it should be in a Star Fox game or something.
Everybody in the game has that face. This game makes very strange choices with character designs. Everybody looks sinister and has like a scowl on their face. Even like the people that are like kind of innocuous and seem like nice guys that you want to help and run errands for are designed in such a way that makes them look kind of pinched and miserable. Like some very bold choices were made with Majora's Mask. It does not feel like my experience with many other Legend of Zelda games.
I've always had this sneaking suspicion, or not always, but since Twilight Princess, and I don't know who sort of the art director or the character designer has been, if it's changed hands throughout the series, but when Twilight Princess came out, and all the characters were just hideous, and had all these weird fashion choices, and there was that weird chicken baby thing. It's this is the first Zelda game which has had sort of this level of realism in its graphics, right? Because up until this point, it was either sprites, or it was Nintendo 64, or it was Wind Waker, which kind of was stylized in a very different direction.
Sure, it was Toon Link, yeah.
Yeah, and I just thought, so was the original vision for the Zelda series everybody just weird looking? It seemed completely plausible based on the character design in Twilight Princess.
I think Twilight Princess was a weird... I'm sorry to cut off your point. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I mean, it very quickly sort of went the other direction. Skyward Sword, everybody looks sort of how you expect Link and Zelda adjacent characters to look. So
Yeah.
I'll just never really understand why they had that weird chicken baby and the weird like the actual baby who was running a store or whatever in that game. Just really disturbing character design.
Yeah. I always felt like Twilight Princess was like a wild Nintendo like overcorrection from Wind Waker. Is that I think they ate a lot of shit essentially during the Wind Waker era because people thought it was too cartoony. And I love the look of Wind Waker. And the irony now, obviously, is if you look back on kind of the great Zelda games from the last 25 years, Toon Link is probably the most like persistent representation of Link throughout Zelda games. There's the 2DS games, the Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass.
Oh yeah,
the Triforce Heroes. He's obviously in the what's the fighting game? Smash Brothers and stuff like that. Yeah. So Toon Link is pretty ubiquitous at this point. But he was very divisive at the time, and I think Nintendo swung real hard in the opposite direction with Twilight Princess. And it's an ugly game. It's not a fun game. I've been so frustrated and pissed off at that game for years and just give up every time I try to play it.
Oh, man.
They put out the fancy...
I remember actually having a good time with that game. Did you really? It was so unappealing to look at is the only issue. I mean, it's a big issue, but no, I have fond memories of actually going through the dungeons and using some of the equipment he's got in that.
Yeah, I don't know that I even sort of lived with it long enough to kind of get into the cycle of what makes, in general, a Zelda game kind of fun and kind of makes it a Zelda game in a lot of ways. The dungeon crawling and things like that. So I bounced off of Twilight Princess every single time I try to play it.
That's weird.
Which has at least been 3 efforts in my life.
Maybe that's next on the list.
I wouldn't get too optimistic about that. But
anyway, sorry to derail a bit.
No, that's all right. So Majora's Mask, I don't know if I love it. I don't think I don't know if I necessarily sort of think it's this masterpiece that podcast host thought it was. But the more I kind of live with it, the more I sort of rely on some of the help from in the game in this kind of modern version, the 3D version. The more I'm like, okay, it has its charms. It definitely, I give Nintendo a lot of credit for at that point in the Legend of Zelda life cycle, doing something pretty unique. There's not a lot of dungeon crawling in this. It feels very much like a bottle episode of your favorite TV show. Like nearly everything that has happened thus far, and I'm about halfway through the game, has happened within the confines of this one town. It feels way more claustrophobic than any Zelda I've ever played. And that's a big move to take a game that is like known for being kind of, riding Epona across Hyrule Field and et cetera, into like, nope, you're just going to hang out. You're just going to be in this town and live with these people and figure out their cycle and glue together this mystery. And hopefully the moon doesn't crash on your head on the 3rd day.
Well, I think the story behind the development was something like they had a year, or maybe not a year. That seems very short, but just a very short time frame in which they could turn around another Zelda game. So they had to reuse a lot of stuff from Ocarina of Time.
Oh, interesting.
And they came up with this kind of very constricted Zelda adventure. But I like that they were able to do it because it's sort of like, for the same reasons that I like Zelda 2 and like Super Mario Brothers 2. It's just like a weird departure from what was expected of the series at the time. And I know Mario 2 is not a Mario game. Don't email me. But I was just thinking, like, you'd never see something like this from, like, a Zelda game coming out now. Or unless Tears of the Kingdom is super weird. Who knows? But it's cool that they were able to branch out in this weird way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think limitations, confines make you creative, right? I think to a certain degree, they push you into a corner where you have to make bold choices sometimes and work within the confines of the resources that you have. So if their timeline was that short and they were, pressed to reuse the assets they had built for Ocarina, this is kind of a cool way to do it. It's I don't know if I necessarily feel like it's what I want from a Zelda game. But my thought
I don't think it's what a lot of people wanted.
Yeah, that, what I want from a Zelda game has evolved pretty significantly over time. So I would be hard pressed at this point to sort of be able to even identify the short list of what that means. Because Breath of the Wild I adore. and Wind Waker I adore, but they are two very different types of games, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It does feel like we had sort of the Ocarina era of Zelda games, which I would, it would be like Ocarina and Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. Maybe Skyward Sword to a degree. I still have to play that.
Yeah.
But it was always like, go to the 8 dungeons or however many dungeons there were and get the treasure. And then, that was sort of the loop.
Yes. Yeah. And I like that loop. That was very satisfying for a long time. It is a warm, comfortable blanket in a game that sort of does that right. I like A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds. And I think that those two games are really kind of best enjoyed almost kind of back to back because they feel like a Link Between Worlds feels like a remake in a lot of ways, a reimagining of A Link to the Past. And it follows much of the same cycle and structure of the previous game, but kind of flips it and gives you kind of parallel universes and all kinds of other kind of fun things. But you still get kind of the lather, rinse, repeat of the dungeon system and the getting the slingshot what is it called?
The hook shot.
The hook shot. That's the word I'm looking for. Exactly when you need it.
The slingshot in Majora's Mask, right?
Do you have a slingshot? You do have a slingshot in Majora's Mask, yeah.
Yeah, it was like young Link had the slingshot and adult Link had the bow, right? And then so now he's probably just stuck with the slingshot.
Yeah.
Because as far as I know, you don't turn into adult Link in Majora's Mask.
And you're the weird, when you're the Deku kid, you blow a snot bubble.
Oh, yeah. God, that was also weird. Little Deku head Link.
Yeah, it is. I continue to be sort of surprised by how dark and just sort of weird Majora's Mask is. It does make a lot of, unintuitive choices with the Legend of Zelda properties, and goes in very sort of like, ways that could be seen as pretty divisive, I think. But yeah, I like sort of a no sacred cows approach to video game making sometimes, and Majora's Mask definitely feels like that.
I'm glad that they ended up making something like this rather than just Ocarina of Time 2, where it's like, here's 8 more dungeons.
Yeah.
And here's, slightly different items for your inventory. And now it's just this strange sort of black sheep of the Zelda series that exists.
It is that, absolutely.
I don't know if you saw these rumors, but for a while, when we knew even less about Tears of the Kingdom than we do now, people were saying like, oh, how long was Breath of the Wild in development? Does it even seem possible that they could put out another one of those in even like less of development time? Because that's sort of what the development time frame looked like on Tears of the Kingdom. And there was all this speculation that, oh, maybe they'll just do something weird and reuse a lot of the assets from Breath of the Wild and make like a sort of a Majora's Mask approach to a sequel.
Oh.
With Tears of the Kingdom, which doesn't seem like what they're doing, but I mean, certainly it sounds like it does reuse a lot of assets from Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, I think so too. Not the least of which is it still appears to be using the same map of Hyrule that you used in Breath of the Wild.
Yeah. But I mean, it sounds like it will be much closer to the Breath of the Wild format, closer than Majora's Mask was to Ocarina of Time. At least.
Yeah, very much so.
But what if they had just done some weird time loop game and just made everyone very upset?
I mean, that'd be neat. That's maybe they are making a weird time loop game. I definitely get sort of like timey-wimey kind of impressions from what I'm seeing in Tears of the Kingdom. But it is clear to me that we know very little, at least those of us who have not sought out spoilers and
those of us who haven't played the whole game already.
Right. Received leaked copies of the game or whatever. It still feels like a big mystery to me. So I'm eager to get into it this Friday.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you before I turn.
Well, so wait, when are you going to finish Majora's Mask? Are you
I don't know.
Wrap it up
That's my
week?
concern. I am kind of liking it. I want to see where it goes. The person who was talking about it, the host that was talking about it on that other podcast, mentioned that it has a very satisfying ending. And I'm like, well, shit, I want to see how it ends now. So I'm afraid I've bitten off a little more than I can chew in the hours that I have between now and Tears of the Kingdom coming out. So I'm not sure.
Because if you wait till you're completely off Tears of the Kingdom, you're not going to remember anything that happens. You're like, when's that lady go down the lake? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know when I'm going to finish Majora's Mask, to answer your question, DJ. It is a great source of stress for me right now.
Maybe you can open up the 3DS during all those loading screens in Tears of the Kingdom.
When I'm downloading my 80 gigabyte day one patch for Tears of the Kingdom. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. Can I balance 2 Zelda games at once? That just seems insanity, right?
I mean, at least this is terrible that I even suggesting this, but at least they're not on the same platforms. You could have one of them going while the other one's, there's not that much downtime in Zelda, though, so I don't know when you would switch in the other one.
When the battery dies.
You can alternate days. Yeah, there you go. You need to recharge your controller or something. You can come up with a plan for this. I think you can do it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your positivity. Your optimism.
Yeah, I'll keep reminding you to play Majora's Mask whenever you try and tell me the latest cool thing you did in Tears of the Kingdom.
I just need an accountability coach. I need you kind of in my ear going, what about Majora's Mask, Randy?
Yeah. Your Zelda personal trainer.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, stand next to the refrigerator this week too. And anytime I go for like ice cream or French fries, just go, what about Majora's Mask, Randy?
Oh, I thought you were going to say, like, how about some celery? Maybe switch it up.
How about some apple slices?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Well, apple slices and some nice Majora's Mask to go with all that Tears of the Kingdom you've just been sticking your face in all weekend.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Do you have a meal plan for Tears of the Kingdom? How disgusting of a weekend is this going to be for you?
Not terribly. I am taking some PTO on Friday, the day the game comes out. I have to take my dog to the vet, but I also want to play a lot of Tears of the Kingdom that day. So no, I've not really sort of sorted out my meal plan. I have coffee on demand. DoorDash will bring me anything I want. Sarah works from home. We'll probably eat lunch together, I imagine. So it should be a nice day. And then this weekend I'm traveling to visit my mom, so I'll bring the Switch with me.
That's nice.
It will prevent me from just sort of sitting in my own filth and playing Tears of the Kingdom all weekend.
Okay. All right. Just make sure to take a shower before you go see your mom.
Yes, nice. Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, no, it won't get too crazy. I don't expect to sort of like show up on Monday with my first 100 hours of Tears of the Kingdom behind me. That just would not even be possible.
Yeah, I was like, well, somehow he played 100 hours over a weekend.
In a game that was only out for 72. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How about you? What is your Tears of the Kingdom attack plan?
I'll probably play it on once I finish work on Friday. It'll be fine.
Like a responsible adult.
Like a mostly responsible adult. I mean, I have to do my ultimate raid, so maybe I'll do it after that. But, yeah, I don't know. It's not going to be like an all-weekend thing for me. Or maybe it will be. Maybe it'll be that good. I'm not at the point where I'm like scheduling meal deliveries, though. At some point, I can probably just like make dinner or go outside, walk around, go to the store.
What we really need is we need an extra life this weekend. So you and I have to play video games for 24 hours.
Oh, and it would just be this game. I mean, you can do that. You don't need extra life's permission.
Somehow turn it into something charitable and make money for sick kids.
Yeah, just put a little donation button up there. Although they just banned somebody from Twitch for, like, they weren't even playing the game. They were just watching a trailer or something. So, Nintendo's just taking crazy pills. Maybe don't stream it.
Proceed with caution.
Yeah. Mm.
So, before I hand it over to you, I will ask the question that led to that conversation on that other podcast. What was your first Zelda game, and what is your favorite Zelda game?
Oh, this one's easy. My first Zelda game was sort of paradoxically Zelda 2. And then I moved over to Zelda 1 second, which is very weird.
That is a rough introduction to that series. It is.
I like Zelda 2. I mean, that may be why I have such a fond memory of it, is I wasn't expecting a Zelda game out of it, which I think is the reason for a lot of people's dislike of that game. Although it's also a very difficult game.
Well, that's my understanding, limited understanding of Zelda 2 is that it's a side-scrolling platformer in a lot of ways, right? Is that not accurate?
Yeah.
And it's brutally difficult.
It's so hard. It's the Majora's Mask of Zelda 1. They were just like, I mean, I don't even know what the reasoning was for designing Zelda 2 that way. It's not like they're like, guys, we have to get out another Zelda game in the next 6 months. I would actually love to learn the history of that. I should look that up. But yeah, without that weird Zelda 1 history, I was totally fine going into Zelda 2. And it's still a lot of fun. It's still a lot of fun, especially if you can just rewind through some of the tougher battles. But my favorite Zelda game is Zelda 3, which is how I refer to A Link to the Past.
Oh, there you go.
Because in the early previews, they would just call it Zelda 3. But I've always been, I think, more of a fan of the 2D Zelda style than the 3D ones. And I do remember just spending tons and tons of time with Zelda 3 or A Link to the Past when it came out.
It's a great game. I think it's aged pretty gracefully, too. I've played it in the last 5 or 6 years, and I think it still is very approachable.
Yeah, I mean, it looks great. It sounds great. It doesn't explain itself especially well compared to like more modern games, but like that's fine. I think a lot of that actually added to my enjoyment because you would have to go around and just scour that whole world map, which was enormous at the time, and try and find like clues to where you're supposed to go next, or maybe there's some area you can't access, but it seems like there's a very obvious like pathway or something that you should be able to surmount in order to get there, and you just need to find whatever tool enables you to do that. Which I don't really have that sort of experience in games I play anymore.
Yeah,
so,
I can see that.
Yeah, it's like timeless to me. It's one of my favorite games of all time, actually.
Oh, nice. Where do you land on the Link Between Worlds? How do you feel about sort of those two as a kind of a package?
It was all right. It wasn't as good as Link to the Past, I don't think. It was cool to go back to that sort of version of Zelda, but just wasn't as memorable for whatever reason. Part of it is I spent so much time with Link to the Past that it would be difficult for a new Zelda game to make that strong of an impression on me.
Oh, I can see that. That's interesting. I played Link Between Worlds first. In Link Between Worlds, it came out quite a bit after. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, DJ. You probably know better than I, but A Link to the Past was a Game Boy game, was it not?
No, it was a Super Nintendo.
Oh, it was a Super Nintendo. Okay. And then A Link Between Worlds is a DS game.
3DS, I think.
3DS game. Wrong on both counts. I asked you to correct me if I
when I
was
years
wrong.
ahead on both counts. That's
yes. So there's quite a bit of time between those two games. And I played them out of order. I played the new one first and then went back to play the old one based on my experience with that. And I think I view A Link Between Worlds a little more fondly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly it's much more modern. It's probably as close to like a modern remake of Link. God, I keep getting the names mixed up. Of Link to the Past as we're going to get. So that was cool. But I think maybe because of that, it just doesn't stand up on its own as well to me. I mean, I'm not saying that as necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. It scratches a lot of the same itch, though, right? I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it was just sort of a fun nostalgia trip for me. And I'd like to go back and play it again, actually, just because, I just don't remember a lot of it. It just didn't really stick out as much for some reason. I don't know if I love the little, like, he would turn 2D and, like, walk through the walls or whatever was going on.
Oh, right, yeah. He could turn, yep.
But yeah, I should give that game another look.
Yeah, that was the hook, is that there were little slots around that you could find in the environment, and he would turn 2D and kind of slide in between and come out in kind of a parallel version of the world.
Yeah. One of the stranger, sort of unique Zelda mechanics. But they've all been a little weird ever since, like Twilight Princess, you just turned into a wolf. That was very strange.
Yes, yeah. Wolf Link.
Yeah. But yeah, Zelda 2 and 3. Easy.
My first... I had a stepbrother who had a Nintendo, so I watched a lot of Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 being played. but I don't have any memory of at that point in my life playing them myself. So the first Zelda that I ever got my hands on and put a ton of hours into was Wind Waker, and it is still my favorite Zelda game.
Yeah, Wind Waker's really good. Probably my favorite 3D Zelda.
Yeah, it's a great 3D Zelda game. It's a beautiful game. The music in it is amazing. The incorporation of music into the way that you play the game is awesome. I love that. Being able to control the weather by playing notes on your ocarina is super fun. And I think it's the prototype for like an open world Zelda game. I think you can I can draw lines between sort of the structure of Wind Waker and the structure of Breath of the Wild.
Fully open world?
Yeah, because Wind Waker very much felt like that. Is obviously it hid sort of loading and stuff behind you sailing around the high seas from place to place on the map. But there's a big sense of discovery in that game where you're out there and, weather will come up and strange things will be floating in the water, or there's an island over there. Let's go over there and see what's on that island. And there's a little puzzle for you to solve, or there's a dungeon you didn't know was there. And just stuff like that. I think, Wind Waker was it felt like the prototype for all of that stuff to kind of like live in the Zelda world.
Yeah, that's funny to you say that, because I just consider all the Zelda games to be open world. Like the original one, the first time I played it, I was just like, oh my god, why? Like, there are no levels. There's just this huge map. It doesn't tell you where to go. It's crazy.
You got to count screens. Go 6 screens right. Go 8 screens north.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And then, Link to the Past was just the same thing. But they've always sort of felt that way to me, where it's just like you have this whole landscape you can explore, and it's up to you to find clues and all that stuff.
That's true. I guess I never really thought of it that way.
Yeah. I felt like Wind Waker was just, Hyrule Field again, except it's all water.
I could see that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great characters in it, though. I really love the Zelda parallel character with the little pirate girl who turns out to, spoiler alert, turns out to be the princess and all this stuff. And I just, it's populated by really fun and memorable characters. And I love the little fish who gives you advice. Pops out of the water and tells you where you're going and where you should be going.
I forgot about that guy.
It was always this little for the listeners who think it's weird that I keep making that noise. There's a fish who gives you advice in that game when you're out on the open sea, and the little sound bite that it plays when he pops out of the water to give you advice is exactly that. It's a little kind of character.
I think people got it. Like, that's a noise a fish makes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All right. Cool.
They're just like, oh yeah, what's that? Oh, he's just making fish noises. Got it.
I clearly have over-explained myself.
All right, speaking of fish noises.
Yeah.
I played Tron. I played Disney's Tron Identity.
Say the whole name, DJ.
Well, that's the name of the game. It's Disney's Tron Identity. I thought it was Tron Identity because it's based on Tron. But then I forgot it's Disney's Tron. And when you start up the game, you get this nice sort of like futuristic LED light sort of abstract animation as the title screen pops up. And then it's just like, oh, Disney's Tron Identity in that little squiggly Disney font. I was like, wow, it looks great next to all of this lighting and, cool futuristic lines and everything. Really just adds to the artistic vision of this game.
I can't tell if you're being condescending or not.
Oh, no, it's terrible.
Okay, all right, just make sure. So you are being condescending. Like, excellent.
Disney gonna Disney.
And the appealing sort of factor here is that it's Mike Bithel's Disney's Tron Identity.
Well, maybe it's Disney's Mike Bithell. Did they purchase Mike Bithell? Was he part of the MCU before all of this?
God, I hope not.
I don't know.
Is he a playable character in Midnight Suns?
He was in Marvel vs. Capcom 4.
There you go. Mike Bithell.
I've lost track of who's in the MCU or who has been acquired by Disney at this point. But anyway, it's a new Tron game, and yeah, it is a really weird hook. Is that it's developed by Mike Bithell, who did Thomas Was Alone, the Square game, sad Square game, and more recently, or at least what I more closely associate with him, he did Subsurface Circular and Quarantine Circular, which are two text adventure games. you might put them on the visual novel spectrum somewhere, but there were you were making choices and investigating mysteries in both of those games. So
Yeah.
it wasn't, there was some interactivity there. You weren't like throwing frisbees at anybody or driving light cycles. But you don't do that in Tron either, which is kind of an interesting departure from other Tron games, which have existed before Tron
that would
Identity.
not be what I would expect in a Tron game, that I'd be riding the motorcycle at some point and
Yeah.
like turning people into pixels that float away by throwing a frisbee at them.
Yeah. You do get to throw the frisbee at one point, but
nice.
You don't really like throw it. You just select the throw frisbee option from a dialogue tree.
You gently place it upon their head.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like a crown.
So it's this cool sort of like visual novel that takes place in the Tron universe. And it's a detective story, which is, I guess I should have expected it coming off his other two games, but certainly wasn't really expecting this to be a detective story. Like I really didn't know what I was in for. But basically, you're in Tron world, you're on the grid, and a crime is taking place at the repository, which is sort of the central archive of information, or like kind of the administrative building in the grid. I'm not totally square on that. But they send in you, who you are, a Tron detective, to solve the mystery. And
you are not like a weirdly de-aged version of Jeff Bridges?
No, so far he hasn't shown up, which is actually like figures into the plot at several points. But I imagine they, well, I don't know. Maybe Disney just owns Jeff Bridges' likeness. Maybe they could have thrown him in here if they wanted to.
They own Macbethel and they own Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, but so far it's not a lot from either of the movies has shown up in this game. Not a lot, I mean, none of the characters. They've mentioned Tron and Flynn, who is Jeff Bridges' human character.
Right.
They come up several times, but it's not like, oh yeah, here's, you get to hang out with what's her name from Tron Legacy. There's not a lot of that happening. Although I have to confess that outside of those two movies, I'm not incredibly familiar with like Tron lore. Like I know there was a series at one point. I'm sure there have been tons of like comics, and there are several other video games. But I've only seen the two movies. I don't know where your Tron level is.
The two movies, and I remember an old video game.
Oh yeah, I played like there were like two Tron arcade games, which were, I don't know, didn't spend a lot of time with those either, but got to drive the tank and throw your identity disc around. Was the frisbee.
But no, I've certainly not read any comics, or I didn't realize there was a TV show. That's cool.
I thought there was. I just felt like there must have been at one point.
Is that a Disney Plus thing? It seems like that would be a Disney Plus thing.
I feel like it predated Disney Plus, but it's definitely on there now because Tron has been sucked up into the mothership. But I don't know how much sort of Tron lore is out there or that I'm missing. So it could be that a lot of this ties back into stuff that has already been established. But the good news is you don't need an understanding of all of that. You barely need an understanding of the movies to get into this. Like you sort of have to know what the grid is and the fact that all the characters are the computer programs living out their lives, I guess. And it helps if you know what an identity disk is. But for the most part, you can just get into this and go start investigating the mystery. And from that point, it plays very similarly to either of the either Subsurface Circular or Quarantine Circular, where it's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of like Mass Effect dialogue trees where you'll be talking to somebody and you're an investigator, so you'll be asking them questions, trying to get leads to help you solve the mystery. But similar to Mike Bithel's games, and maybe frustratingly dissimilar to somebody who's used to how Mass Effect conversations work, or like conversations in a lot of AAA adventure games. So like Horizon, for instance, you do not get to go through and exhaust every single option in the dialogue tree. Like you will typically be presented with 2 or 3 options, but then you pick one and the conversation just continues at that point, and eventually you reach the next branch in the conversation. And it doesn't even feel like each sort of dialogue choice is significantly branching the conversation or the outcome of the plot in one direction or another. It's just your character says something else at that point, and it wouldn't make sense for them to go back and say the other thing. But it doesn't matter because it didn't totally drive the plot. There are a few instances where you do have to make a critical choice, or it'll do that thing that I hate, where it's like, oh, Tron remembered that, or that's what you said at this point. Which is, very clearly is going to have some impact on the story.
Right.
But it's not like every single moment in this game you are, making critical decisions. It's just, it feels like a very, all the conversations in this feel very natural. They have a really good flow to them.
That's cool.
Yeah, that was something I really liked about Subsurface Circular once I got used to it, because I was just like, oh, wait, both of these dialogue options sound interesting, and I want to hear the response to both of them, but it just doesn't let you do that. But
yeah,
eventually you're just like, fine, that's how the game works.
Well, yeah, and I think sort of if your approach is to sort of create more natural sounding kind of dialogue and interactions in video games, some of that sort of like choose your own text adventure stuff in RPGs can feel very stilted and can feel like,
oh yeah.
you're not really having a conversation. You're just reading a checklist of options. And I do remember that about Subsurface Circular is that, and you have a limited time to select them too, right? You had pretty quick sort of like reflexes on them. You had to sort of pick the one based on a brief description that seemed like this is where the conversation's going, or this is where I want the conversation to go. And you have to sort of flick that option fast.
I don't remember that in Subsurface. It's definitely not in this. So
maybe I'm confusing it with a decision.
That happens in some games for sure, like the Telltale games especially. But there's no time pressure, which is nice, because sometimes I'll like try and take a break and dip into the codex, which you can get from the pause menu, just trying to familiarize myself with all the characters in this, or you can get a whole log of all the dialogue in your most recent interaction, which is helpful because sometimes there's some weird characters that come up that I don't fully recognize. But yeah, it's been very familiar as somebody who's played both of those the Circular games. Just a cool little detective mystery. And I think it really, I complain about the fact that it very clearly puts the sort of branching points up on the screen when they occur. But it feels like it does incentivize repeated playthroughs by doing that, because it sort of like other visual novels I've played, you can, as you're going through the codex, it will show you the actual tree of sort of each character's arc through the game. So it's like, oh, here you decided to help this character or have them accompany you or whatever. Or, you didn't decide to help this character. You can see how the tree branches off, and there are these different like branches that you no longer have access to. In fact, at one point, I was playing this getting ready for bed, or like in getting ready to go to sleep, I guess. And probably should have been playing it when I was a little more conscious, because I inadvertently picked this option that like shut down one of the characters I was talking to, and they like won't talk to me anymore. They're just like really upset. So I was like, oh no. I didn't realize that was going to be the outcome, and there's not really like an undo option or like a choice to go back and reload your old save file. So I was just like, well.
An option to find them and apologize.
Yeah, that was just an irresponsible choice I made in this run through, and we'll see if things go differently the next time. But it's also kind of interesting, because how interesting is it if you go through a story like this and it's just everything happens how you expected or how you intended? I think it's kind of fun to have a little wrench thrown into it.
Yeah, definitely.
Even if it's not like something that the creator came up with, it's something that happened because I was falling asleep. But anyway, I fully intend to do a second playthrough of this, because it feels like there's just so much there, and the characters are pretty interesting. It's really weird. I don't really, like, none of the characters in the Tron movies felt especially deep. Is that true? Yeah, that's
right. Fair. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's fun getting this new take on it, where it doesn't just have to turn into an action movie at some point. It's just, you're a detective and trying to uncover clues. So they get a little bit more into the characters are a little bit more interesting in this than in either of the Tron movies. I don't know how the TV series was.
Cool. I mean, what a weird flex. I mean, if I had a bingo card for likely video game things to happen in 2023, I don't know if a Telltale style visual novel version of Tron by indie darling Mike Bithell would have been on there. So it seems like a bit of a strange enigma that this exists. But it's cool that you dig it, that it seems to be doing kind of unique things.
Yeah. Like, I would be surprised if they even keep making Tron games. I guess Disney really wants to keep it going as a thing. But it's great that it's this weird visual novel, because if they just made what I would expect from a Tron game, like every couple levels you hop into your light cycle, and when you're outside of it, you're throwing the frisbee around, I probably wouldn't play that one. So I'm glad that it turned out this way.
Yeah.
There's this whole other thing, like when you're talking to characters in this, eventually it feels like in the middle of the most significant interactions, you will have to help them defrag their identity disk, which is usually something that ties into whatever incident that happened at the repository on this evening caused a lot of characters to have their memory scrambled slightly. So that is sort of the plot excuse that they have for making your character do this. But the way you do this is you play this little puzzle game, which it's kind of like a card matching game where you have a series of cards with suits and numbers on them going around this identity disk, and you have to match you have to match numbers and suits to clear out a specific number of cards, which is interesting. And apparently they're expecting people to get really into it, because when you start up the game, on the title screen, one of the options is endless mode. And I can only assume that is referring to just playing the puzzle game, and not that there is an endless mode of the main story, because I don't even know what that would be. But it's just kind of an unusual gameplay element as you're going through the novel. It's fun that you get to do something that feels a little bit like sort of something computery that a Tron character would do.
Sure. And
the game is, it's interesting, but there's also just an option to completely skip each puzzle section. And during probably the second half of the game, I just found myself doing that, because I was much more invested in the story at that point. I was like, I'll match some cards later if I feel like it. Maybe I'll get into the endless mode. But just there is a game. You get to push some buttons in the middle of all this reading, if that is something that might appeal to you. So actually, the thing that was really killing it for me is every time this loads up, it's like, okay, eliminate all of these cards except for 2 or 3, and then you'll be done. But then there's this secondary condition that's eliminate 7 cards of the same suit in a row, or just stuff like that. And if you do that, you get some weird unlock, like a new codex entry, where I think you can change the color of your character. But that was making me insane, because that just takes you to really look at the board and figure out how you're going to chain all these card matches together. And as enjoyable as that is to puzzle out, I was just like, I want to know what happens to the computer program. So I just skip the thing.
And I'll come back to it later.
Get all those unlockables later.
Yeah. That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
So do you is this structured like a Tron movie, in that you have sort of the mundane world and the in-game computer world?
No, it takes place entirely. No, I don't think it's a spoiler. It takes place entirely in this repository building, which is in the grid, and you just move between rooms and talk to the people there.
Oh, gotcha.
At least so far, I feel like I'm at the very end of my first playthrough, so it could be it pulls a huge twist right at the end, but it doesn't feel like that's going to be a thing.
It was all a dream. It was all a video game.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. This is on my radar. I want to play this. This probably would have been a more realistic game to play in the few days before.
more responsible thing to play.
Here's the game comes out, but I went another way.
Yeah. Well,
cool.
It's nice. It's only I feel like I've spent maybe a couple hours on this playthrough, which is good, because it's a good length for a game like this. I think the Mike Bithel's previous adventure games were similar. And, especially if I want to do a second or maybe even a third playthrough, it'll be nice not having to slog through like 10 hours of dialogue trees.
Right.
But yeah, I'm having a surprisingly good time with it. It's I feel like it's been a while since I played a mystery game like this. Eventually, I forget if I mentioned this, you'll pick a dialogue option and it will basically turn into, like, the character's response will give you evidence or like a lead you need to complete your investigation. And at that point, you can go back and talk to other characters again and present them with this, and it'll give you new dialogue options. But that is sort of, I don't remember if that happened in the previous games. I think maybe you unlock keywords to bring up, or like specific questions to ask other characters. But aside from the card minigame, that is the thing in this that feels the most video gamey. It like removes it from being just a pure visual novel.
Oh, gotcha.
But it's fun because it fits in very well with sort of the detective noir atmosphere of it.
Cool.
So anyway, that's Disney's Tron Identity. It's out on various platforms. I think I'm playing it on the Switch. It's been fine.
You mentioned earlier that we were not sure if there was a Tron TV show at some point, and there was. It was called Tron Uprising. It was an animated science fiction television series.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, it aired on the Disney Channel in 2012, and it took place between the Tron movies, between Tron and Tron Legacy.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine, I guess.
Currently streaming in its entirety on Disney Plus, if that appeals to anyone. This voice cast is bonkers. Bruce Boxleitner's in there because that's kind of his thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got Elijah Wood, Mandy Moore, Nate Cordry, Lance Henriksen, Reginald Vell Johnson from Die Hard, Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman, and Tricia Helfer.
It's quite a cast.
Yeah.
Man, now that you mention it, this game could probably use a little more Bruce Boxleitner, but that's probably my only complaint about it.
Cool. Well, Disney trying real hard to make Tron a thing.
Yeah.
30 years later.
Yeah, I wish the second movie is just not very good.
No.
It looks
soundtrack's
great.
I mean, the soundtrack's amazing.
Visually, this looks terrific. I mean, Tron's just like the perfect fit for a video game for some weird reason. So it's great to all the visuals, all the characters you talk to just look terrific.
Cool. I'll put this on my list.
Yeah, it's good.
All right. Well, we should wrap this thing up. If you need any more video game hangover in your brain, you should follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/VGHangover. And you can always get show notes and links and tell us what you thought about this episode at VGHangover.com. That is also where you can get a link to our Discord. You can hang out with us, chat about video games, chat about Tears of the Kingdom, or whatever else you're playing this weekend if that's not your thing. We would encourage you to subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcasting app of choice, and maybe help us out by telling your friends about the show.
Yeah, that would be great. Helps us get the word out, bring in new listeners, get their recipes for Zelda bread. I don't know what we're doing this week.
Mm.
We want to give thanks again to Carl Brueggemann for our intro and outro music this week. You can head over to carlbmusic.bandcamp.com to check out some of our stuff. Maybe buy an album or two.
Cool. We'll be back next week. I wonder what we'll talk about next week. I wonder what it could be.
I don't know, you're talking about Sonic the Hedgehog too.
For 2 hours. Until then, this is Randy Dickinson.
This is DJ Ross.
Thanks for listening to Video Game Hangover. Goodbye.
Good night.
See ya. Yeah. Yeah.